This is the last official session that we're going to have. And I think it's just appropriate that after we played some games and did lots of single question psychology and all these Tversky Kahneman stuff, that we talk about like the serious stuff. What is the serious stuff? What kind of impact do we have on others? What kind of impact do we have on the world? And what kind of impact do we have on ourselves? Can we change anything? Is change possible? Can we affect others? Can we affect who we are and what it is that we do? Can we improve in some way? And it's a tricky situation, and going from the lab experiments with these single questions to doing something meaningful in the field is a big gap. It's a big leap, and not everything is easy. But the good thing about this is that we've come a long way in science to know how to do randomized control trials and to test things out. And some of the effects, not all of them, but some of the effects have brought us some insights that I feel like I should share with you. So this session is going to be a mixed bag. I'm going to just dump a lot of things on you to tell you, you have this technique and this technique, and you have this kind of thing that you can do and the other thing that you can do. But at the end, when we look at the evidence is very mixed. So the takeaway from this whole session is going to be, we have to test, but we have to know how to test. And we need to know what kind of tools are available. We don't need to start from nothing. We have a bunch of tools, and then we need to implement them in the field in order to see what works best, to compare one to the other. And then even when we have evidence, we need to know how to quantify this evidence, how to interpret this evidence, how to make sure that we're not falling trap into misunderstanding, so that we inflict on others misinformation and disinformation. So kind of this session is meant to bring everything together into the final session in order for you to hopefully see the complexity in science, the complexity in real life, and how to bridge between what it is that we do in this classroom to what's happening out there. So later on, if you choose to do a career that has something about behavioral insights, or has something about behavioral economics, or has something about judgment decision making, that you'll know where to start. Okay? All right. So I listen to a lot of audiobooks. I shared a bunch of them with you. Now I'm like 3/4 into this book. It's been out for a while. It was a little bit of a struggle for me. Not everything there makes perfect sense to me based on what it is that I know from the literature. But I think that the main messages that I'm going to play to you from this book are very important. And I think that they're solid when I look at the evidence and I see what it is that she's arguing. And what I really like about this, the book is called You Have More Influence Than You Think. Vanessa Bones is a very prestigious, high-profile researcher from an Ivy League university, a very well-known and respected place. And she studies social influence and help-seeking and compliance and consent. So how do people come to say yes to all kinds of things? And it's interesting because especially in the last 2 weeks, when I listen to her book and I get emails or Zulip messages from you, I get to think about this a lot. Because this message, you have more influence than you think, plays a very important role in how I respond to you. So you have a lot of requests. So you want extensions and you want a grade appeal, or you want something that has to do with the class that you're requesting from me or requesting from the TAs. And I have to say that it's very, very difficult. Maybe it's my personality, but it's very difficult for me to say no, especially when somebody comes to me in my office hours and talks to me in person and they have a request. It's very, very difficult for me to say no. So I think in the student's mind, like, this is very scary. He's the professor, there's authority, there's a big gap. He doesn't see us, he doesn't care about what, but actually students have a lot of influence. And the main message here is when you actually try to ask people for things, even things that seem completely out of context, asking them for things that seem completely unreasonable, seems like there's very high compliance rates. 70, 80, 90% of people give you their mobile, allow you to browse, call other people, give you money, take you to places. It's just unbelievable. So at the beginning, she asked people, how many do you think will say yes in percentages? And people say, I don't know, 2%, 5%. And then they end up getting 70%, 80%, 90% people saying yes to them. And then they realize we actually have a lot more influence than we think. But she also talks about the positive of this and the negative of this. Sometimes we don't realize how much influence we have. And this is another problem that I have. Sometimes I'm very busy and I respond to you very, very fast, or I just forward you to one of the TAs, like, Christy, have a look at this, can you take care of it? And I don't take care enough consideration to how you see what it is that I say. So I have a lot more influence on you than I tend to think. I don't understand all the nuances. And only afterwards, when I go back to this, because I have to reflect on this, then I realize maybe I have not done this in the right way. Maybe the way that I present things, the way that I pose requests to you, maybe that has more influence than I intended to. So sometimes power and influence, when brought together, can cause something disastrous. So I'm going to play 2 clips, very, very short clips from this book, but already by now, even though I don't agree with everything, there's a very important message for you to take away from this book, and I recommend you listen or read this.
Is basically an account of all the things that have surprised me in my research over the years. So my collaborators and I, what we typically do is we come up with these experimental paradigms where we have our participants go out and try to influence people in different ways. And each time we design a new paradigm, we say to ourselves, there's no way our participants are going to get people to do this. So for example, we've had participants ask people for pretty big favors. We've had participants ask other strangers to lie for them or vandalize library books. And each time, we come up with this task and we say, I bet nobody's going to do this. Our participants go out and they make these requests. And it turns out that just by asking, people find it so hard to say no that they wind up doing these things much more frequently than our participants think and much more frequently than we ever think. So that's been incredibly surprising time after time.
Yeah, so that's already gives you a few examples. So really to vandalize the library books or to lie to other people, just finding somebody random that doesn't really know you, then getting in order to lie to somebody else. It's remarkable, and you can see some of these clips online on YouTube. Outstanding work that she's doing there, and some of it is on the questionable part, but the message is very clear.
So the book really has sort of 2 stories. One is this happy story, which is that we have more influence than we think, and that should make us all more confident when we ask for things. But all the same dynamics that make us underestimate our positive influence also have this sort of dark side, which really speaks to a lot of what we see these days. So for example, it speaks to aspects of the Me Too movement, where people really don't realize sort of how their comments, their requests, and things like that might be perceived by other people and how their words might impact other people. It also kind of speaks to the sort of cacophony of voices that we see and all the shouting that we see in today's discourse, because a lot of the times people shout because they feel like they're not being heard and they feel like they're speaking into the void. And one thing that my book talks about is not only gaining influence and using influence when you have it, but also recognizing when maybe you should just pull back. Maybe you should be a little bit more gentle in a situation. Maybe you shouldn't make that request. And it's pretty rare to see that sort of message in the influence landscape, that actually you don't always need to use your influence. Sometimes knowing that you have it should make you think twice and kind of take a step back.
Yeah, so important message. And also on the other side of this is the ability to say no to certain things. So it's something that I wasn't very good at the beginning of my career. And it also seems to be a little bit of a gender gap in this kind of thing. So some of my colleagues, I would say just generally as a stereotype, seems like the female colleagues say yes a lot more easily than we do males. So we've developed this ability to say no to influence techniques by our admin people. Let's say, can you teach in the summer? Can you give this workshop? Can you come on the weekend? So we try to protect ourselves very much, but then we don't realize that basically what happens is that these admin people are going to go to our female colleagues and get them to do this instead, and then they get very disgruntled about this. So sometimes even the ability to say no to influence techniques like this, you need to be able to do this as a group. You need to be able to do this, overcoming yourself and perhaps some of the inherent disadvantages that you have just by your social status, just by the fact that you're a student or by the fact that you're of a certain gender. So a lot to think of from here. Now, this is a big topic, the topic of influence. Perhaps you've heard of Cialdini, definitely one of our biggest scholars, highly awarded both for psychology and for the business school. And his story is quite remarkable because back when he was young, just like you, thinking about what he should do, he realized that there's a big gap in academia, in academia, we actually don't know how to do things very well when it comes to the field. So he said, how about instead I go and do a PhD based on some theoretical gap? I'll just go and work for all the biggest marketing firms, and I'll study their influence techniques, and then I'll come up with a paradigm. So he did this. He actually went as a student, and he worked in different firms, and he wrote down all of the secrets and all the techniques on how they do things, and then he came up with these 6 very influential influence techniques, and he wrote this Bible. People refer to this, any marketer or any person who wants to get you to do all kinds of things, they refer to the book Influence. It's been out there for, I don't know, 40 years already as the Bible, and him as the prophet of influence. And you would think that after 40 years, 50 years that people have been exposed to all these kinds of things, that these things wouldn't work anymore. But it seems like despite the changes in the world and despite people knowing about this and despite us seeing marketing and marketers use this all the time, people still are very influenced by these things. So we're not going to go over all of the book. I'm just going to give you some of the highlights from these influence techniques and the most up-to-date evidence, the way that I see it. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of very good evidence. I expected hundreds of articles in each one of these because it's been there for such a long time. But then at the end, I was able to just identify a few. Sometimes there's a meta-analysis of some of the studies, but at the end, it does seem like almost every one of these 6 techniques has some influence over people, especially under some context. So any one of those can work if you want to get an extension or get your grade higher from the professor. So pay attention to this, and you can think about how to apply this in the way that you communicate with others when you need something to get done. So I'm going to go over 4 of these. Perhaps you've heard of these because they're very, very famous and they've been used for many things. Foot in the door, door in the face, low balling, and then the very peculiar one, but you are free. So I won't show any videos because I think it's just a very straightforward sort of thing. So foot in the door. At the beginning, I think when he was doing this kind of thing, you start off by a small request. So you come to somebody and you ask for something that seems very reasonable. So for example, if you're a marketer and you go to somebody, and back then in the 60s, 70s, mostly women were staying back home and staying at home in the suburbia, not doing much cooking or watching TV, what it is. But then you wanted to sell them something while their husband is away. And the question is, how would you get your foot in the door? How would you get inside the house in order to sell something to these ladies? And if you would just come and at the door say, I want to offer you to rebuild your room or to change all your cabinets. It's like, absolutely not, and then closes the door. What is the right approach for this? And I think every marketer with healthy instincts will tell you this. First, you come in and say, can I get a glass of water? Says, yes, of course, glass of water, no problem. You go in glass of water, then you increase your ask by asking for something else. And finally, when you feel like you're ready, then you come in for the big ask. Like, can we go through your cabinets in order to measure how many? Okay, I've already said yes to. He's already inside my house. I've already agreed to. He's already sitting here. He seems so friendly, therefore I'm going to give him some more. So there's lots of versions for this. This is like a nice summary of this. Will you help me shop for cake ingredients? Sure. And then 10 minutes later, will you help me actually bake the cake, which is a bigger ask? So of course, some of the factors that we would like to understand is what is the difference? How big of a gap? But Cialdini has shown that actually it could be from a very small ask, glass of water, to something that's very, very big in order to change something or to sell something in changing the house. So very widely used technique. I think a lot of marketers know something about this. Just getting people to have some compliance. So once you get people to agree, it's already a lot easier to get them to agree to something else. So it seems like, especially when Cialdini came out with the book, there were some replications, and actually the replications were quite successful at the beginning. But it seems like over time, less and less, when we run replications, less and less of an effect over there. And it could be that Cialdini's fame went against him. So now the earlier replications were okay, but more recently, it's kind of like a mixed bag, and the effects seem to be a lot smaller. It could be that we changed as people and we're a lot more hesitant to bring people into our homes or just to listen to somebody coming up to us in the street. Maybe we've developed a lot of defenses. Maybe just people know that this is what happens. So people in advance say, no, even a small ask, I don't want to do anything about this. So what I want you to take away from this is that it used to be a big thing. We used to have a lot of evidence for this working well, but then over time, it seems to be some kind of a decline, and we're not really sure why that is. So for the more recent ones, like this paper over here, where they did this in the Ukraine and in Poland, it seems like in 2003, it worked for them. But then they ran this again in 2013, and then suddenly doesn't work that well anymore. So before you implement something like this on a large scale, you might want to test it out to see what works or not. But the nice thing about this influence technique is that it doesn't really cost you a lot to just have one additional step in between your big ask and nothing. You can just add one small request and then just test the waters. If it doesn't cost you anything, then why not do it? Even if it's a mixed replication, maybe, just maybe, it will work for you to some extent. Okay, so this is our foot in the door 40 and 50 years after Cialdini came out with influence. How about door in the face? So door in the face is almost the opposite from this. Door in the face is you come in with the big ask, and then you know it's going to get rejected. But the big ask is not meant for the big ask. You don't care about the big ask. It's much bigger than what you want. What you want is a smaller ask that you will ask for after you get rejected. But you can think about all kinds of things. So for example, you can write a professor and say, can we have an extension of a month? And the professor, absolutely not. There's no way I can give you a month. So, okay, can we just have like 5 days? Like, oh, 5 days compared to the month. That seems reasonable. Therefore, okay, I will grant this. So at first, if you don't mind seeming unreasonable, so the other person perceives you to be completely unreasonable, you can come in with a big ask, knowing that you're going to get rejected just for the shock, and then reduce this. And surprisingly, I always thought that foot in the door is going to be a lot better than door in the face. But when I was looking at the evidence, actually, I know this team, so I know them quite well. The people from Cologne have a very good team of behavioral economics and management people and people who do social psychology really well. And they decided to do this door in the face after half a century from CLD in 1975. They just tried to replicate this, and it's unbelievable just how well this replicates so many years after that, and with very similar rates of compliance. So I don't know if you can see this. I'll just zoom into this. So you can get compliance of up to 50%, which is unbelievable. It was unbelievable when Cialdini did this in the 1970s, and it's even more unbelievable that this still works. That if you just come on with a big ask, like 50% of the times they'll go for, you'll go down to the smaller ask and people will say, oh, okay, this seems more reasonable. Let's go for it. Why this one works better than foot in the door, I'm not sure. They seem to do slightly different techniques, but this really seems to replicate very well. So they've done this according to all the best practices of open science. It was very fascinating for me to see like the entire process at the beginning. I think they were asking people, so do you think this is going to replicate or not replicate? I'm like, the other stuff doesn't replicate that well, so I don't think this is going to work out. But when they came out with the results, I'm like, wow, this looks good. So I'm convinced that this happens, and 50% compliance, that's unbelievable. So why is this happening? Why does this seem to be a little bit better than the other one? Because it puts into people a sense of guilt and perhaps of shame. It's like, I really want to help students, but a month, I can't do this, so I don't want to say no. So you have more influence than you think you have, that to the extent that I really want to grant you something, but I can't do a month. And then afterwards, I just feel so guilty about not being able to give you a month that I'll just go for the 5 days. Also, it just makes the original ask, the thing that you really care about, it just makes it seem like very small and like it's, if I won't give this, I just seem like I'm unreasonable. Okay, 5 days, yeah, that seems a lot better. So there's a contrast effect over there. So those seem to be like the drivers of why this door in the face is working perhaps better than foot in the door. Then comes the question, can we do both? Like, what happens when we put a few influence techniques in one go? So some people did this. You cannot really do this in foot in the door and door in the face, but perhaps you can combine this with something else. So this is a good time to talk about but you are free. But you are free technique is so strange that I don't understand how this works. But the entire technique about but you are free is that at the end of the sentence, when you ask for something, you just say, but you are free to say no. Like, what? This kind of thing works? That doesn't make any sense to me. But the evidence just shows that this really leads people to comply more. I'll just show you the results from this. So what they did over here is that they had 4 conditions in a randomized control trial. So control condition, and this already, Vanessa Bonds, what she was saying is that already when you ask something, without giving any kinds of influence techniques, already 20% of people are going to say yes, which is already more than 0. So why not ask? Have nothing to lose by asking. 20% are going to say yes, and they're going to donate on average. So this is asking for donations, 2.66. So 6 people donated 2.66. That's already like quite good in this kind of thing. When I would have expected, like, why would they, do this kind of thing? Why would they donate? So when it's thinking about charities, charity A, charity B, like sometimes it's the way that the charities frame these things. So if you just come up to people, it seems like a 20% here at least would give about 2.5 euros. But then you've got the classic, but you are free. So but you are free leads to 43%. So just by adding but you are free at the end of the ask for the donations, it goes up from 20 to 43 and from 266 to 3.08. The first time I saw this, I'm like, I don't know. I need to see some meta-analysis. I need to see a register report about this. But this is coming up, not to worry. I'm going to show you additional evidence. But this is just to show the comparison between control and but you are free. What happened when you do the door in the face? Very similar to but you are free. But in the door in the face, you have 2 stages. You have to go all the way to say something that you're a big ask, and then you need to come down from this. But you are free is in like one move. You just need to add something at the end. And you can see that while the compliance rates are about the same, 43, 43, just look at the donation rates. It's about double for but you are free. So not only do you want to measure the compliance rates, but you also want to measure how much people actually gave. And then comes the big question, what happens when you combine both? So you can do both. And here you have the combined door in the face, but you are free. And you can see that the increase is from 13 individually, each one of them, to 16. So it doesn't go up by a lot, but it does increase this to 53%. But what's interesting is that sometimes when you combine this, it's somewhere in between both of these techniques. So 2.4 euros compared to 3, but you are free. So sometimes combining techniques actually reduces what you'll get overall. So if you just like compute this 13 times 3.0, so you'll get 40 euros. But if you combine both of these techniques, you'll get a little bit less than that. I don't think it's statistically significant or anything like that, but it's just for you to be mindful that combining techniques not necessarily means that you'll get more. Okay. So the main takeaway that I have for you is to run the randomized control trials. And if you're thinking of combining different techniques, don't test them alone, test them when they're combined. And then you'll be able to see whether this really adds something or maybe it takes away. So sometimes averaging techniques does not give you a better performance, as you can see here. Okay. All right. All right, so, but you are free. It's an interesting technique. So what I was looking for all kinds of different studies that will show me some kind of an effect, meta-analysis of everything. It seems like when it comes to correlations, they summarize this as a correlation of 0.13, which if you by now know a little bit about effect sizes, this is considered to be a relatively weak effect. So it's nothing major. But when you consider just how simple the manipulation is, the influence is, just it costs you nothing. So this is coming from a meta-analysis of 42 studies. So after all, when you aggregate a lot of studies that did this, but you are free, then it shows R equals 0.13. So I thought this was interesting. This is from a while ago, 2013, but somebody who I know, so Adrian, he's from our team. He has worked with HKU students. We have published together many times. So Adrian over here took the lead to try and update this, but not only update this in terms of 2013 to 2024, he also wanted to apply a technique that we talked about very briefly before. A meta-analysis is not enough because it could be that the literature is biased. Only positive results are published. All the things that didn't work go to the file drawer. So just looking at the published studies is not enough. So actually, he redid the whole thing. And you can see just how many studies he found on this. So there's lots of studies here. And his conclusion is actually very interesting. He found a reasonable effect. So a Cohen's d of 0.44, which is already very good. But he ran all these. So we have a bunch of publication bias analyses. And you can see that some of them are somewhat indicative. So for example, when we have PET and PEACE, which are two publication bias assessments, then it does seem like something odd is going on here. And there's something in this literature where a lot of findings are not published. Some of these, like Eggers, are just like marginal. So some tests say something is happening with publication bias. Some of them say not so much. And then it comes down to the realization that we just need more research, because when you look at some of these meta-analysis of studies that were of low risk, so had less of a bias to them, then it drops to a Cohen's d or Hedges G of 0.11. So even 0.11 is better than nothing for something like what you are free, but still it's not 0.44. So what I want you to take away from this is that we have two meta-analyses that show some kind of an effect. So from 2013 to this one, we've had a confirmation that the literature indicates that you are free actually has an effect. But there are some indications that perhaps it would not work all the time. And perhaps there's some kind of a publication bias. So like many other things, some of the conclusions that we need to have is we need more register reports and we need more testing. It's unfortunate. We would have liked to have some conclusion by now. But one other thing that I want to say about Adrian is that we worked together on creating something for the entire community. So rather than just us doing a meta-analysis by ourselves, so we did one meta-analysis together, me and Adrian, we also created a template for others. So if you go on my website, you can see a meta-analysis section, and Adrian and I have a template for how to run meta-analysis for others. And what I like about Adrian is really he does everything. So materials, the data, and the code, everything is open science and shared. So when I see this kind of meta-analysis, I trust this a little bit more than I trust the one that came before it. So there's something called like a Z-curve, a P-curve, which looks at the kind of distribution of all of the findings in there. And there's some indication that things here seem a little bit suspicious, so too good to be true. And when we look at this kind of distribution, I won't go into how to interpret this, but there's some indication that something is going on here. There's some missing studies here that should be, but are not there. And if we do some kind of a correction, then the effect moves a little bit towards the zero. So maybe the effect is not as high as originally thought. Okay. So the thing to take away from this is that we do need to do meta-analysis. We need to look at publication bias. Sometimes publication bias does not show us, does not give us clear indication. Then we need to make some adjustment. And sometimes what we take away from our meta-analysis is that our evidence so far is not very good. And what we need is a well-controlled, randomized control trial that is done with a registered report with many labs from around the world. And finally, the last one that I want to talk to you, and I think you know this one very well. It's something that we see all the time in almost everything. It's super annoying. One of the things that I really don't like about visiting the US is that we are very used to just having everything together with the taxes, with the VAT, with everything, and we just get the final price. But the thing that happens with the US is that you get the price, but it's the price before tax. And of course, as a visitor, we don't process it this way. You come over there thinking you're going to pay $10, and then they say, no, it's not yet $10, it's plus VAT. And then you need to add the tax on top of that. If you're in a restaurant, you need to also add 20 to 25% of a tip. And then you're asking that, did I really want this? I'm not really sure, but I'm already here. It's already like that. I already need to pay. So now I'm going to pay with the tax and everything. So lowball is just getting somebody to say yes. So for example, you can get this for only 200. And then somebody says, yes, I'm in. But then somebody comes after a while and says, yeah, but what I told you doesn't include the taxes. So it gets you sometimes a little bit upset and angry, which is a downside to the lowball technique. So you need to be very careful with this. If you want repeated customers, maybe this is not the best way to do this. But if you're on a one-time transaction with somebody, perhaps doing this lowballing is a good technique. Happens many times. Perhaps you don't drive or own a car, but perhaps you can talk to your parents about this. Many times when you go to a mechanic, it's like it starts from something small, but then it keeps on going, increasing. So he's lowballing you. And once the car is already there, he keeps adding all kinds of costs. When you buy a car, it's like, okay, do you want to add an entertainment system? Do you want to add, I don't know, cruise control, whatever. So, okay, I've already said yes to the car. Might as well say yes to all these other things. So lowball technique. I see this happening all the time. I have to say that when I looked for the evidence for this, I already had this notion in mind that this is probably going to work. And it seems like there are at least 2 meta-analyses that really show this effect. So in this meta-analysis, you can see it also includes Cialdini from 1978. So it is in the book. It's in there. He was talking about this lowballing. It's one of the strongest techniques that he's talking about into getting into people to comply. Marketers use this all the time. And the effect size overall is an Pearson's R of 0.16. So here's a meta-analysis of about 4,700 people. So I was quite happy with this at the time when I saw this meta-analysis, and I already included this in my slides. But then after a while, when I was Googling this meta-analysis, I came across another meta-analysis, and it's actually from a very similar date. So this is 2016. This one is 2015. Both of these are like different journals. This is one in French, and this one is actually the one that I know. Social Influence is a journal that I occasionally read. And this one also had evidence showing in support of lowballing. So I thought, okay, so great, 2 meta-analyses showing evidence in support of lowball technique. And only after a while staring at this did I realize that there's a little bit of a problem, which is some of the stuff that me and Adrian talk about when we give workshops on how to do meta-analysis. And the curious thing about this, and one of the things that we really don't do as scholars, we don't do this in the literature, we don't read the small numbers and the small details. So I noticed a bunch of things, but I'm going to share one of these with you. So because they all code Cialdini, this one codes 1978, right? So you've got both of these, and they code the three experiments. But then I just compared the numbers. So they coded both of them. Did they code this in the same way? So it seems like the green ones, 20, 20, 31.3, 31.3, but some of these in red are coded differently. And actually, when I went back to the original, I didn't understand how both of them coded this. So sometimes when you see a coding in a meta-analysis, both of these are like good groups of scholars that know their stuff. But sometimes, I don't know, is this a mistake? From 31 to 24.1. So here we have 52.9, 55.9. I don't know, this is dodgy. Something's going on. Somebody made a mistake. The question is who? But we don't notice this. So sometimes when you just assume, the meta-analysis folks know how to do things well. So I wanted to check their mistake. What is the problem? There's no materials data in code. Only Adrian does this kind of stuff. We only started sharing and coding and everything. And you have to ask yourself, why is meta-analysis data in code not shared? So in experiments, people say, no, this is my data. I collected this. Maybe it's proprietary. Maybe it's confidential. Maybe there's like a bunch of things that prevent me from sharing this. I want to protect anonymity. I want to protect the company. But a meta-analysis, what is a meta-analysis? The meta-analysis is just a coding of the existing literature. There's no reason not to share this kind of thing. But still, in some meta-analysis, not everybody is like Adrian, not everybody shares what it is that they did. So actually, I have no way of checking this aside from emailing the scholars who typically say, what? This was 2015, 2016, we don't know, lost their laptops, moved universities, this kind of thing. So there's no way to check what goes on over there. But I thought this was a very good occasion. So now that we've finished the 4 influence techniques, I just wanted to share a little bit with you this point about the need to be very careful with meta-analysis. So in this course, Christy in a tutorial and me in some of the sessions, we were saying, meta-analysis, look at the meta-analysis, it's the most important thing in order for us to know a literature, what is the takeaway from this? And many people look at the meta-analysis as something that is very, very solid, but I also want to give you some perspective about this, that the meta-analysis is to be trusted only if it does all sorts of things regarding open science that I believe in. So I promote doing a pre-registration, doing a documentation and sharing everything in a meta-analysis. And there's a way to do this. Only that way can you make sure that you don't have any mistakes in there. It already happened, and in some of our meta-analysis, we realized that we did some of the analysis wrong, or then a package bug came out, and then we realized the package ran this in a different way. But how would we know this unless we had everything open and shared? So we invite people who take a pledge like me, check me, replicate me. We pay for people to find our mistakes. The only way for them to find our mistakes is by us sharing everything. So I'm going to take a little bit of a detour just to tell you a little bit about meta-analysis, because I feel that this is very important. John Ioannidis is an absolutely crazy researcher. If you just Google scholar him, I don't understand how somebody can publish like 100 articles a year. Definitely one of our biggest, most prolific, has come under some controversy during the COVID pandemic, but he's definitely, when John Ioannidis says something, then we definitely listen. So John Ioannidis in 2005 came up with a very controversial paper that argued why most published research is wrong. And he doesn't only do this with most published research, he also claims this about meta-analysis. So just look at this headline: the mass production of redundant, misleading, and conflicted systematic reviews and meta-analysis. So he argues, I'm going to save you the reading, and to say that he argues that only 3% of meta-analysis are clinically useful. So he does this mapping. On the side here, if you wonder what this thing is, it just shows the explosion of systematic reviews and meta-analysis. So back then in the 1980s, we just had a few. To do a meta-analysis was a lot of work to go through the literature and code all of this. But as technology evolved, and then as people realized that you actually don't need to collect data, and you can just run a systematic review of many other papers, then people just started to do this. He also does this analysis by country to show. So actually getting a systematic review published, you can get this quite easily, not easily, but more easier than in some of the other experimental stuff. So you can get this into our top journals. Actually, when you look at the psychology journals, got Psychological Bulletin, Psychological Review, they only publish reviews and meta-analysis because they want to have a grand look at everything, perspectives of psychological science. All of these publish systematic reviews and meta-analysis, and these are the highest impact factor. These are the most well-cited. So if you want to get a bonus for publishing something, then perhaps you want to publish more systematic reviews and meta-analysis. But some of the ridiculous thing in this is that sometimes you have more systematic reviews and meta-analysis than you have actual papers on this. So a lot of people are competing over getting the same, analyzing the same data. And then when you look at this distribution, John Ioannidis says something, and we listen and we go and we check our stuff. But here he claims 20% are flawed beyond repair, 13% are misleading, 17% are decent, but not very useful for us. And then redundant and unnecessary. So here we have a lot of redundancy. People just like, we don't need another meta-analysis. Somebody else did this. Just this example with 2 meta-analysis. It's good to look at the same thing and see if they're correct or not. Unpublished 20%, unfortunate, but clinically useful and decent, only 3%. So very interesting. So when I saw this come out, I asked myself, does this hold any water? Is there any truth in this? But then came a bunch of open science folks. I know almost all of them. Some of them have published with us. Farid over there worked with HKU students. So a very good group of highly influential open science scholars. And they decided to check what John Ioannidis was claiming. So they looked at 54 of meta-analysis in the psychological science literature, and only 50% of the data was available. So in order to check, you need to have some data. But of the 50%, about half calculated effects or coded things wrong. Okay, so if you don't have things open, you will never catch this kind of thing. So their conclusion is that from the literature, from all the meta-analysis, about 25% are potentially meaningful. So this was a downer. We didn't really know what to think about this, but then came another one, and this suggested, and I also know some of the folks over here, very high profile. So if we talked about this, I don't know, stat check. So you can check your statistics. You can upload your PDF. It extracts everything. So Michelle here is the one that coded this for her PhD. So they looked at all the some meta-analysis, and they coded all the effects. They coded this again. Many of them could not be reproduced, but then 13 out of the 33 had some errors. But their conclusion was a little bit more optimistic. They said there were some errors, just like the one that we saw with the two meta-analysis that overlap, but they didn't change the interpretation or the takeaway. So it seems like they have errors, and we should definitely correct these errors, but the errors were rather minor. Small problems in the computation of mean effect size or the way that they coded. So I wouldn't go as far as John and this. I wouldn't say that only 3%. We actually meta-science this. So this is a meta-science technique in order to evaluate how well we're doing. But what I would take away from this is like sometimes it pays off to do some evaluation of the literature. And when you see a meta-analysis, it's not enough that it's a meta-analysis, because it could very well be one of these very crazy 30,000 meta-analyses that were published. Now, when is this? 2014. I think it kept going exponentially. It could be one of those, but once in a while, increasingly, more and more, there's groups like the open science folks that I belong to that publish everything with the materials, with the data, with the code, and also have multiple coders go over this so that we can be a little bit like Adrian, and less about all these others that don't share the data in their code. So a meta-science project of going over to see so how many of them report everything that needs to be done. So for example, here you can see a meta-analysis, so how many of them share the protocol? Not many. How many share funding? A little bit more. Databases, abstracts. So it's like there's all these kinds of coding to show that we have a way to go with meta-analysis. So even when you do a meta-analysis, you really need to know what you're doing. And another problem that we don't pay enough attention to, which I want you to realize. So here, for example, and this is very related to us, this is about nudge. So this is meta-analysis of nudge effects published in PNAS. So you can see here somebody writing about this. So 2 years ago, one of the biggest statistician was looking at the meta-analysis regarding the nudge theory. And some of you had the option of, I don't know who picked it up, but to look at some of the nudging to check some of the talks. And one of the options was Brian Wanzik. So Brian Wanzik has been expelled from Cornell for doing all kinds of data fudging. So we now do not take his findings very seriously, but here you have a nudge theory meta-analysis that has a bunch of Brian Wanzik bases. So even when you do a meta-analysis, maybe at the time they didn't know that Brian Wanzik has problems with his data and probably a lot of questionable research practices or even fraud. But once we know this, we need to update the meta-analysis, but the meta-analysis is already there and it's done on things that are that have fraud in them. So sometimes what you want to do, and now we have tools for this. So for example, if you use Zotero, so Zotero has a way of checking whether something has been retracted, where there's fraud involved. So what you can take is all the references from a meta-analysis, input this into Zotero, and see if anything comes up. So if you'll put this in Zotero, all the Brian Wanzik stuff, it will tell you this has been retracted, this stuff is fraud or questionable research practices. Do not trust this meta-analysis. Now you need to update the meta-analysis. If we had the data in the code, we could easily just take this out and rerun stuff, but because they don't share, then what can we do? So we need to pay attention to this. So I'll just get you back to this pyramid of evidence. So even when we talk about influence techniques, we need to pay attention. Even when we have meta-analysis, we need to pay attention to this pyramid where if we don't have anything that was pre-registered, if we don't have the materials, the data in the code, then maybe don't pay too much attention to this. But if you have something like Adrian's, that shows that but you are free, you can get between 0.11 to 0.44, then actually you move up, right? So he has a pre-registration, he shares all the data in the code. So it moves you up into the green. And if this was done as a registry report, so now we're doing a bunch of registry reports on all kinds of influence techniques, then you can finally get into the green, and then you can influence policy highly relevant to policymakers, worthy of significant attention. So increasingly more and more, especially at the second half of the session, I will try and get you closer to the green. But I just wanted to highlight some of the issues that you need to pay attention to. Okay. So this is about influence techniques, a little bit about Cialdini and 4 different techniques, a little bit about open science and science credibility, because we talked about this in the class. You had a whole assignment about this in project 2. So this is to get you thinking about this. And this is already interesting because now you have a few tools that you can use in order to influence your professors to give you a little bit more of what it is that you need in order to do well in life. But the second session, we're going to talk about how you influence yourselves. How can you change what it is that you do? So we'll take a 5-minute break. When we come back, we'll talk about self-influence, self-behavior change. 5 minutes. So he does really interesting stuff, and I watch him for this kind of advice on how to talk to people, how to deliver effective presentations. He does this a lot better than I do or anyone that attends his stuff, but I learn a lot from this. I don't really need to do this in this class, but when I speak in a class where there's no mic, sometimes I know that my voice is too low. It's too quiet, and I need to remind myself again and again to increase my volume. Sometimes because we're in our heads, we don't realize, we hear ourselves very loud and clear, but we don't realize that when we communicate, actually the others don't hear us well. Sometimes they need to make an effort. Sometimes some people, like I know some professor here, are just like shout every time we start this class. There's another professor over there shouting his heart out. So sometimes you're a little bit too loud. The question is, let's say that you're too quiet and you realize that this is an issue. How do you work on yourself in order to change your behavior that you've done for decades? This is who you are for 20 years since you started talking. Yeah. For 20 years, this is how you heard yourself. How do you convince yourself? How do you work on yourself in order to increase the way that you talk, increase the volume? And he has a bunch of tips, but I really like this tip because the way that what he uses here, we refer to this as a nudge. And this is a very clever nudge because it's not a nudge that comes from the outside. It's a nudge that you can force yourself by just doing something that you're already doing. So this is what he recommends. Oh, great.
Marina has the question, how do I remind myself to speak louder? It's something we all struggle with. How do I remind myself not to eat too much junk food? How do I remind myself to exercise more? We all have different versions of this. And to me, the way that you can remind yourself to speak louder and the way you can give yourself more reminders is with a simple method. On your phone, write the word volume on your home screen and save that as your home screen. Statistically, it's been proven we pick up our phones 300 times a day minimum. And what that means is, Marina, you will have 300 free reminders to speak louder. And often the reason why it's hard is because you speak the way you speak and you've spoken that way for the last 15 years. 20 years, 50 years. When you want to undo something, when you want to learn a new behavior to replace an old one, the reason why it's extremely difficult is because you've spent so many years embedding that behavior. So it takes time to undo it and it takes lots of conscious reminders.
Yeah, I like this tip because we do use our mobiles way too often. We pick them up all the time. Sometimes you don't even realize just how many times we pick those up. When we don't have them, sometimes we feel like they're on us. We feel these phantom vibrations. Sometimes we feel like it's ringing. We just feel very attached to our mobiles because we look at this all the time. And this is a really good way of just nudging yourself by putting some kind of an image with a reminder volume that keeps coming up every time you open your mobile. This is one thing. What other things do people put on their wallpapers? Sometimes they put their loved ones. They want to be reminded of their kids or their partners or their dogs and cats. So it's something that helps you feel good. So if you don't feel great along the day, you go to studies or you go to your job and you're very frustrated, today I have this bad class. But if you have 300 times when you take your mobile, you see a picture of your dog and it's like, oh, dog. And then it just helps you cheer up a little bit. So you can nudge yourself to all sorts of things. You can nudge yourself in order to increase volume, or you can nudge yourself in order to feel better if you know what makes you feel better. I see some people on their phones just have a photo of themselves. That's also good. You know, if that makes you feel better. Looking at yourself, that's another thing. But people realize the power in this, but they don't often use this for stuff like this in order to change a behavior. They use this as a reminder of people who they love, but they don't use this in order to nudge different things. So the main question to you and the things that we're going to talk about right now is like, suppose that I want to change something in my behavior. And there's so many things that I want to change about my behavior. So I don't go to the gym enough and I don't eat healthy enough. I don't sleep enough. There's all sorts of things that I want to have more in my life and do less of other things that are not so healthy. So how do I go about doing this? So we'll talk about a few techniques. But in order for us to talk about these techniques, we also need to talk about people who really know their stuff. Katie Milkman, who we'll see a few videos of, to me, she is the guru, but not guru by self-proclaimed guru. She is the guru like an academic. And the reason why I proclaim her to be a guru, an academic guru, is because very humbly, she does some of the best research that I've ever seen in all of behavioral economics and social psychology, judgment decision-making. So I really like the way that she does stuff. How does she do stuff? She almost invented a category that we called mega studies. Mega studies means instead of running this on 30, 60, 100 participants, how many does she run this on? Hundreds of thousands of participants. And then how does she figure out what works and what doesn't work? So some of us are like, theory says, and then Richard Thaler said that, and then let me try. But she does this differently. She does competitions. So she opens this up to everybody and she says, I have 1 million people. Bring me your best influence. What do you think will work best? And I'm going to do a randomized control trial on all of those together to see which one works the best. And then we can proclaim a winner. And she did this again and again, many, many times. How to get people to go to the gym, how to get people to take a flu shot, how to get people to vaccinate in COVID-19, how to get people to do a lot of different things. She basically said, I don't know. Let's get all the best minds in the world. We have a pandemic, we have COVID-19. We need to get people vaccinated. We need to get them to social distance and put a mask on. I don't know how to do this. Let's get all the experts together and run this. Now, she's in Wharton, so she has a lot of money, and she teaches some of the biggest EMBAs in the world. So she can talk to these people. So in this case, she runs this in places like Walmart. She works with all these big companies that have millions of participants. So she can do this. So for example, with Walmart that has a pharmacy, one of the things that they did is to try and see what kind of SMS text messages people should be sent in order to get them to come and take the flu shot. So it's very interesting what she does. If you want to read more about a summary of all the stuff that she has been doing, she has a Center for Change for Good, together with Angela Duckworth. So both of them over there in Wharton in Philadelphia. And she wrote this book, came out this year or last year, How to Change. So it's a really good take both on changing ourselves and then also thinking about how to help others change around us. So I went over the many pages that she has over there, and I tried to take the biggest tips that I thought were the most convincing to me based on the evidence that I know. So we talked about many of these things. So for example, a default effect is something that's very, very strong. You need to understand what kind of defaults we're talking about. But generally, we are a reference point machine. We always compare. We always look at some reference point. And the reference point for people is what? Habits. So habit just means that I go along with what it is that I already do. So for example, with a mobile phone, my habit is just to open the mobile phone and just look at this all the time, 300 times a day, right? So I'm going to use that habit in order to remind myself also to think. I have a habit of when I come back from school, the first thing I do, go to the fridge, open the fridge, whatever is there, if it's a cake, a donut, whatever, I just eat it. So that's good, that's a habit. But perhaps instead of a donut or a cake, you can have something that's a little bit healthier there. So you can use your habit in order to help yourself, make it easier for yourself by default to do the right thing or remind yourself of something. If it's very difficult to go to the gym and it's very difficult for me to go to the gym, you need to form a habit. Not every day it's like, oh, well, I go to the gym today or not, but force yourself by having a habit. How do you do this? You schedule a class. You say, every Monday, doesn't matter what happens. If it rains outside, if it's cold outside, every Monday I would go. You form a habit. At the beginning, very, very difficult. First month, hell. But then afterwards, every Monday, you just know, every Monday I go, it's a habit. So forming healthy habits is something that's very, very good. And piggybacking on the old habits, like mobiles, like opening the fridge, like what is it that happens when you wake up. So all of these things, piggybacking is very good to get yourself to change behavior. And reminders, sometimes people, especially people who are easily distracted or people who are not very well organized, very difficult for us to remember all kinds of things. So for example, if we need to do a doctor's appointment, you're not at this age, but I'm getting to the age where you need to do a medical check every year. So you need to go and see and make sure. So just schedule this in advance. Don't wait. Maybe I'll remember in a year, maybe not. But when you leave the doctor, just when you leave the doctor, then you make an appointment for the next year and then you make sure that it's in your schedule. So every time that you have something that is very, very important, don't rely on yourself for this to just happen magically for you to remember, but have reminders. So nowadays, for almost everything that's in my schedule, I have a reminder 2 hours before. That's the default for Google Calendar. And I have a reminder 10 minutes before because I want to make sure that I don't forget to come to class. But then I also, with the very important ones, I also have a reminder for 1 day before. Sometimes it's a week before if it's an important deadline. So I play with these reminders and everything is in my schedule. As far as I'm concerned, if it's not in my schedule, it does not exist. So she talks about all these different things. And then comes the point of, let's say that there's something that I'm not doing that I really want to start doing. How do I best go about doing that? So she did a lot of research on this. We listened to her once talking to Richard Thaler because she has a podcast called Choiceology. She was making fun of Richard Thaler talking about the urinals with the fly. So she was saying, but we have so many interesting findings, and she really has a lot. So can you talk about some other nudges that are? And one of the things that she first became very famous for is what's called the fresh start effect. So you can ride all kinds of things that happen naturally. So for example, end of the semester happens naturally. It's going to come. The beginning of the year, it's a date, it's going to come. Your birthday, it's a date, it's going to come. You know exactly when that is. You can ride on these dates in order to plan when you're going to make a difference, when you're going to make a behavior change. Okay. So here's her explaining from how to change what is the fresh start effect.
Moments in our lives when we also feel like we have a clean slate and a new beginning. Any moment that feels distinct from the rest, like the start of a new week or a new month, celebration of a holiday, or when you, for instance, celebrate a birthday, that's a new year in your life. You move to a new city or start a new job, you become a parent. So there's all these moments come with identity shifts, and this sense, in terms of the way we psychologically mark time, is not linear. Instead, we think about these chapters in our lives, and we demarcate the beginning of a chapter when something big happens and changes, like, oh, those were my college years, those are the Boston years. And so all of these markers give us the sense that we have a clean slate and a fresh start. There's a segregation of time where that was the old me, this is the new me, and the new me can do it because the new me isn't saddled with all those failures of the old me. And the new me is also more likely to sort of step back and think big picture about their goals. Like, what do I want to achieve in this new era, in this new week even? So we've shown this in lots of research that these moments that demarcate time make us more motivated to pursue our goals. So for instance, we found that people are more likely to search for the term diet on Google at the start of a new week or a new month or a new year, following holidays that feel like fresh starts. We see the same effect. Yes, even Mondays. Mondays do it. Actually, Monday effects are very big. It's a fresh start of the week, and that's a big one. Even though it feels like it would be little, you're sort of coming back from a separation. You've had a weekend to reflect, and you sit down and it's like a new me, I'm going to do it this week. And you think about setting your goals. We see the same thing when we look at when undergraduates visit the gym. The same undergraduate is more likely to visit the gym earlier in the week, month, year, semester, following school holidays, and following birthdays, with the notable exception of 21st birthdays. And I will let you speculate as to why those might be special.
Yeah. So basically everyone's working out right around their birthday, except on their 21st birthday. They're like, never mind. I have better things to do.
They have better things to do right after their 21st birthday. You got it.
Do you have to like figure that out? Where you like, gosh, who is breaking this data? Like, why is this bad?
Literally, my
What happens in the US in the 21st birthday? You can start drinking. So that's why you don't. Anyway, that's something that's unique to the US. They go on and on about this, but very engaging. You can see she knows how to communicate very well. And lots of talks all over YouTube. And it started with this one. Already, I appreciate, just by looking at this, I already appreciate, what do I appreciate? So data, supplementary material available at, so there's data available, so we can analyze this data to see where it came from, to see that there are no issues over there. Fresh start effect really seems like people in their minds, just like we talked about mental accounting, that we have different mental accounting for movie tickets and for other spending. People also have mental accounting when it comes to dates. So people kind of reset, and it does seem like at the beginning of the year, suddenly you have a lot of subscriptions to the gym. The tricky part is not only to do a behavior change at that point in time, but to make sure that this is lasting, because some of the research shows that people don't come to the gym after they subscribe. So they do a lot of planned changes, but then they don't stick with it. So first, it's good that you've got a date that can change things, and it could be just like a Monday, or it could be end of the semester, or it could be your birthday or the beginning of the year. But it really helps when you do something that allows you to change habits, that allows you to move from a previous behavior to a new behavior, and then to establish a new habit by forming all kinds of commitments or setting a goal, let's say to going together with another classmate or another person. So if you can make that change, the fresh start effect, and then you can commit to it by forming a habit or doing a social pledge or having social influence by going with another person, then this is a good way to carry on this change for a very, very long time. So this is how to motivate aspirational behavior about all kinds of changes in our lives. Then comes another very interesting study, and I really like how she did this in the gym. So she really goes to the real world in the field, and she does these experiments in the field. And the question was really how to get people to stick to the gym schedule. So let's say in the fresh start effect, people signed up for the gym. Okay, so they said, starting from the new year, I'm going to be a healthy new person. I'm going to put all the unhealthy behaviors aside. Then the question is, how do we get people to actually keep coming after 10 weeks? But you can see the decline. But then we want to control this decline. We want to help people to come to the gym more, so that if they start losing, they start skipping, losing some of the appointments, they don't come anymore. How do we get them back on track? How do we make sure that they don't just go because they had a fresh start effect, but they also go because they're motivated to go? So it's really interesting, some of the ideas that she came up with. And the idea that worked very well is called temptation bundling. And this came from her own experience. She talks about this in TED Talks. And it's a curious kind of effect. And I admit that I do this as well. So for example, if there's something that you really like to do, so if there's a TV show that you really want to watch, I tell to myself, you can only watch this when you're on the treadmill in the gym. So you're not allowed to do this unless you bundle something that you really love with something that you really don't want to do, like going to the gym. So if you can say to yourself, there's no TV, you're not going to watch your favorite TV show unless you go to the gym and do this on the treadmill. That's one thing. Another thing that we do, Katie also talks about this, is audiobooks. So I listen to a lot of audiobooks. I do this when I'm on the MTR. I do this when I hike. I do this quite a bit. But sometimes I just want to listen to this because it's there's something, I'm waiting for something to happen in the book, or I'm very curious about something. Then I just get myself to the gym. And you can do this not just on the treadmill. You can do everything on the gym while listening to an audiobook that you really love. But we'll do this with podcasts. So this is what they actually did. They offered people to when it comes to music, so they can listen to the music or they can get their favorite audiobook. So they would buy this for the people and say, if you go to the gym, they would take away their pads or their whatever device and they would lock this in the locker in the gym, so that people would be motivated to go to the gym, unlock, and then do this while they're exercising. And it seems like, and this is really curious, that at some point people realize that this is working on them. So they asked Katie, they asked those researchers to say, can you please take away from this and lock this in the gym so I will go and visit more? So you can combine a bunch of temptation bundling with other interventions, other influence techniques like reminders. So once again, even in her earlier days, she did samples that I will never reach. So you can see 6,792. And then she saw an increase, something between 10 to 14%. Not huge, but it's already quite a lot. So if you want to increase your chances of sticking with something like this, then this is a good way to go. So it works better, of course, if you're motivated to do this rather than some experimenter telling you this is what you should do. But I'll let Katie talk a little bit about this.
I'm excited to be here today and to tell you about something a little different than what you've heard about this morning. I'm actually going to tell you about what we've learned from behavioral economics through analyses of data big and small and A/B testing about how we can improve decisions. And I want to start by telling you about an idea for helping someone named Liz Lemon. For those of you who aren't familiar with Liz Lemon, she's the lead character from NBC's former hit show 30 Rock. And her character is a 30-something exec who works too much, exercises too little, and is generally a disaster when it comes to self-control. I'd like to make two plausible assumptions about Liz. First, assume Liz wishes she exercised more but lacks the willpower. And second, assume she has a thing for trashy novels, but feels guilty wasting her time reading junk. I'm going to tell you about an idea for solving both of Liz's problems that I call temptation bundling. The idea is simple. What if Liz only allowed herself to read trashy novels when exercising at the gym? She'd stop wasting time at home on literary garbage and start craving trips to the gym to find out what happens next in her latest thriller. Not only that, but she'll enjoy her novel and her workout more combined. She won't feel guilty reading the novel, and time will fly at the gym. Now, as important as it is to increase exercise and reduce wasted time, temptation bundling can solve many other dual self-control problems as well. For instance, imagine you're trying to watch your waistline, and you also have a difficult mentee, let's call him John, at work, who you should spend more time with. What if you only let yourself to go to your favorite burger restaurant whose burgers you crave while spending time with John? You'd spend more time with John and eat fewer burgers when you should be dieting. Or for the ladies in the audience, imagine only allowing yourself to get a pedicure while catching up on overdue work emails. These are all examples of ways that temptation bundling can solve multiple problems for us at once. Of course, an important question is, does it work? And to find out, my collaborators and I ran an A/B test where we looked to see whether or not people exercised more when they were given access to tempting audio novels only at the gym on iPods that were locked away there versus people who could access their iPods anytime. And we found that indeed it had significant benefits. Not only that, but the majority of participants at the end of our study were delighted to pony up cash to pay us to take away their own iPods and lock them at the gym in monitored lockers so they could only access them when exercising.
iPods, huh? So yeah, they did this with the gyms. I have to say I implement this stuff on myself. Not that it's evidence or anything, but I find this stuff to be effective, and I find the evidence to be very, very convincing. Plus, it meets a lot of the open science practices that I believe in. So let's say that we believe in this, and some of this works, and we implemented this on ourselves, and we're happy. But how can we help others who perhaps don't know about this, and we also want to get them to enroll to the gym and stay in the gym? Like, what's a way to do this on a mass scale? So she's interested in helping people change their own behavior, but she's also interested in a policy-making sort of way to support others. So let's say people want to be healthy, people want to eat better, people want to exercise. How can we help them? They've already subscribed to the gym. How can we help them stick with their fresh start effect and having subscribed? So she does this unbelievable, she calls this mega studies. And I just don't understand, like, how does she get all these samples? I guess it helps to be in Wharton, but still, she teamed up with an American fitness chain. I can't remember which one, but she worked with them in order to really remind people who subscribe to that gym chain to try and increase their visits. And she just basically said, we're going to try a bunch of different things. Please give me all your interventions, and we're going to try as much as possible to get people to come and visit the gym more often. And she ran this, so 60,000 people from 15 different US universities. I wish I could do something like this in Hong Kong. And they tried 54 different 4-week digital programs or interventions to encourage exercise. And you can see that the results kind of striking. So if we just like zoom into this, you can see that 45 of these interventions significantly increased the gym weekly visits by 9% to 27%, which is really encouraging. It's really encouraging. It's not what people predicted though. So when she had people submit their suggested interventions, she also asked them, by how much do you think you're going to get the gym visits to increase? And I think this is when it's really a humbling experience to see the comparison between the predictions and what actually happens. So these yellow ones that you see over here are the predictions, and the blue ones is what happened in reality. So when she asked people to predict how, well, I'll just show you what this is. So for example, a bonus. So a bonus just means to give people credits for returning after a missed workout. So if they missed their workout, just telling people, if you come back, then you'll get a bonus. You get something more just to get you back on track. Higher incentives, just to offer people all kinds of things in order to exercise more. And then a free audiobook provided. So if you'll come and you exercise, we'll give you an audiobook. So they've tried basically everything. You can see starting from the structure of the class to when the class is, to the way that they think about the class. They bundled both nudges and incentives. So they basically had the most intense competition between behavioral economics possible in order to see which one can get the most. And here, the solid line is the line of 0. All of these are confidence intervals. So if the confidence intervals overlaps with the 0, it means the intervention didn't work very well. So not everything worked. Only these ones here that deviate, that do not, the confidence intervals do not include the null, are ones that worked. And you can see not everything worked, but some of them did work. Actually, some of them worked quite well, these ones here on the top, but it's nothing compared to what people estimated it will work. So I think the takeaway from this is some things do work, but the changes are small. So 9% to 23% is considered to be a lot given just how small these interventions are. But when people expect 100% increase in visits to the gym, that's not going to happen. People are very difficult to change. So we need to be very, very humble. It's just amazing how far off the scholars were on this. So not only does she run this on a lot of participants, not only does she get all the top behavioral economists to compete in nudges, but she also tests the predictions versus reality to show what actually works and what doesn't compared to what it is that we thought is going to work. So love this stuff. This is terrific. So what else can we do with mega studies? Nudging for vaccinations. So you can see 680,000 people. So she did this with Walmart. And here, the big challenge for the behavioral economists was give us the mechanism for text reminders that is going to get people to come to take their flu shots the most. And people tried a bunch of different things, from 1 text to 2 text, initial text 2 hours later, you've got 3 days later, you've got a bunch of different things like, what do they have here? Let's zoom in. The one that worked the best was flu shot is waiting for you. So they call this based on the mere ownership effect and endowment effect. Giving this to the person is as if it's already there and it's just waiting for them. So endowment effect seems to work very well here. It's like, oh, it's mine, it's there, it's waiting just for me to come. It seems to influence people the most. And then just a reminder, sometimes just a reminder works really well. Come back and get your flu shot. So you can see just like this competition, they're not significantly different. The top ones are not significantly different from one another, but then they work a lot better than some of the other things. So for example, when you say people, just think about the risk of catching the flu, and people are like, oh, I don't care. but it's waiting for me. Oh, I care about that. The flu is there. It's mine. So it's funny to reflect on some of like what seems to work over here. And we know that this is solid because it's real data with real implementation on more than 500,000 people. Just extraordinary how she is able to do this kind of thing. And you can see that she runs this in very big teams. So we've got like very big names here. Katie Milkman together with Angela Duckworth, they do some pretty remarkable stuff. In addition, we've got other people that do all kinds of nudges to increase the COVID-19. So the first one was flu vaccinations with Walmart. They did this during the COVID-19. So they was based on this. How many participants? Just unbelievable. Almost so 93,000 people. And then a second one, 67,000 people. So I really wish I could do something like this in Hong Kong, maybe not during a pandemic, but just like generally. And if this is not enough, they also do the stuff that we do, which is run things on online participants, and then they run, you know, if I run 1,000, 1,500, I feel like I've done an exceptional job. They just go 3,000. Yeah, no problem. Let's just throw money at this. So you can see here the kind of different kind of reminders, and it does seem like when you give an ownership reminder, this is yours. It's just waiting for you. It just seems to be the best. If you combine this with a video, that also works. So it just seems like these reminders, if they're framed in an ownership way, endowment effect, it really increases the average appointment rates and also intention to take part in this. So we've had another similar one. How many people here? 27,000 people. So here you can see like a very big, sorry, let's go back to this. Yeah, so you got the treatment group and the control group, and you can see the treatment group is a lot higher. What you just need to remember is what they measured here are intentions. We don't have the data here when it comes to COVID-19, how many people actually went over there, but it's already, you know, changing intentions is already a big deal. Another mega study about getting flu vaccinations, Katie Milkman, yeah, reserved for you, very interesting. More on COVID-19, this one had almost 500,000 people from 23 different countries. And the big insight from here is that if you thought, okay, Katie Milkman did something, we can now implement this in Hong Kong, it's gonna work. It doesn't, because it seems like every country has a different way of responding to these kinds of things. So the United Kingdom does not respond very well to this. You can see the effect 0 here. It overlaps with this, but in some places it works very well. I don't know why Pakistan is up there. But then on average, these things tend to work, but you really need to test these things out. So just by the fact that things work with Walmart on 500,000 people in the US does not mean that this is going to work for us here in Hong Kong. But the takeaway is we need to test this, and there is some promise. So if you do this, maybe run the same kind of thing here in Hong Kong in order to know what works the best and how. So interesting stuff, broad and narrow. I won't go into this. Yeah. One of the biggest questions, and I think this is, so Richard Thaler is over there in the University of Chicago, and many of them are not behavioral economists, they're just economists. They don't like the behavior stuff, they don't like the psychology aspect of it. And when you talk to an economist, how do you change behavior? Incentives. So unless they have a financial incentives, they're not going to change anything. And we can see from these nudges that the nudges are relatively small. So it can be, I don't know, 5%, 10%, at best, you know, 20% if we can really get those. But some of the differences, some of the changes that we need to do in society require a very big change. So for example, with climate change, it's not enough that we change 5%, 10% of people who already have an inclination to change. We want to change society overall. We want to change corporations that have the opposite financial incentive. So it's a big question, what happens when you compare nudging with incentives? So it used to be that some of the behavioral economists, especially at the beginning, were saying, yeah, we don't need incentives anymore. Let's just throw away incentives and just do nudges. But even Richard Thaler, many behavioral economists, Katie Milkman say, no. Do incentives. Some things can only be changed with incentives. And then on top of that, you can try and play with the nudges. So here is one trial that tried to change based on incentives and nudges together. And you can see monetary incentives to increase the COVID-19. Oh, sorry, it's this one. Yeah. So you can see incentives in order to get people to vaccinate were a lot higher than the nudges. And they tried all kinds of nudges. They tried social impact and argument and information and all kinds of different things in their reminders. But finally, the thing that won over all of those is incentives. So sometimes when I go to companies and they ask me, it's like, well, can you tell us about the greatest nudge? How can we do the fresh start effect in order to get people to, I'm like, wait, did you try incentives? Did you try to actually give them some money to promote, reward them in some way? Because incentives seem to do much better than nudges. So we need to be humble with all respect to Cialdini, with all respect to Katie Milkman, with all respect to all these behavioral economics and nudges. incentives win almost every time. Okay, we need to be very humble about this. It's not enough to take judgment decision making. You also need to go to the economics department and study about how to play with incentives over there. Yeah, so they do a bunch of different things. So, for example, they sometimes try to do incentives by offering people lotteries, but this tends to backfire. I won't really go into this. But if you want to know why lotteries don't always work and incentives can actually sometimes backfire, then Freakonomics that documents a lot of very strange phenomena in the economics literature. This is a really good episode, came out 2 years ago when we thought, oh yeah, let's just do lotteries for vaccinations and then everybody's going to vaccinate. They tried to implement this in a few places and this really backfired where people are just like vaccinated less rather than vaccinated more. And then they took this in many different directions. I won't go into all the directions that they did this, but if you do this for going to the gym, you can also do this for courts, for showing up to court. So it's not a big deal in Hong Kong, but in the US, you have jury duty. You have to show up if you're a juror. You have to come and be a juror, or if you committed an offense, you get a summons and you need to show up to court in order to be trialed. If you miss that, then you might get a sentence. You might go to jail. So sometimes people just forget to show up to court. And the question is, how can we get people to not forget that they need to go to court and then show up on time and then avoid getting a penalty or being jailed to this? So failure to appear for a court appointment, if there's no message, it's up there. But then if we do all kinds of reminders about, please make a plan on how you're going to show to court on time, or consequences, if you don't show up to court, you're going to go to jail. So this reduces, and then a combination of plan making and consequences seems to do well. So this almost looks like the one that we saw with the but you are free and door in the face, right? So we have different kinds of influence techniques, and then we test them with a randomized control trial against each other. And then we can see that actually the combination one reduces the non-appearance to court by a lot. But these are fantastic because they really very mass scale. So what did they do here? It was in New York City. Yeah, it led to 30,000 fewer arrests, a reduce in 13 to 21%. So just by sending people text reminders with different kind of text. So that could be a nudge. That could be a different way to do this. So I don't know if you've ever went to the HKU clinic, but we get some emails or text messages. Sometimes, before a doctor's appointment, they just remind you, please remember to plan your way, plan in advance. And sometimes there's also incentives, like if you don't show up to HKU clinic, if you miss your appointment, what happens? You need to pay a fee, right? It's not a big fee. Perhaps professors don't really care about this, but I've seen that students even care about something as small as 30 Hong Kong dollars. So sometimes you also need incentives, financial incentives. Text reminders, for sure, helps a little bit, but incentives, if you take away 30 Hong Kong dollars from students and you penalize them, then they might care about this. Some people think that we should also penalize students for all kinds of things that they do in courses with money. I'm against this kind of stuff, but it's an interesting thought, what kind of things, not only to penalize, but also to reward people with money. Need to be very careful with these kind of things. I just want to show you some of the text messages, like how to make a plan, how to do consequences. So helpful reminder, go to court, mark the date on your calendar and set an alarm on your phone. So 7 days before, 3 days before, 1 day before. The consequences are, show up to avoid an arrest warrant. So it seems very, very small, but actually you can already see that it makes a difference between a decrease of 13% or a decrease of 21%. Fascinating stuff. One day I hope I'll get to run some large scale, but I don't know if they'll let a foreign or expat run something like this in Hong Kong, maybe with my colleagues. Last thing I want to show you, and this is a little bit disappointing because we have a big problem with climate change. We need to address this. And the question is, like, how do you get people to consume less? How do you get people to affect the environment less? And I have to say, I've seen many, many trials on hundreds of thousands of people. You can see just how many people were involved here. All these are scholars running these mass randomized control trials, trying to get people to do all kinds of things in order to help save the environment. And what is the conclusion? We just can't get people to change their behavior when it comes to the climate. So all kinds of things. They try a bunch of different nudges. They do psychological distance and the system justification and negative emotions, pluralistic ignorance. And you can see all the attempts. It goes up, it goes down. Finally, at the end, it's very, very difficult to impact people. They tried a bunch of different nudges about changing the light bulbs and changing things in the home, or even providing different incentives doesn't work as much. I won't go into this because we don't have a lot of time. And at the end, the question is why? Why doesn't it work? So we've got people like John over here, who is a very well-accomplished economist, but he's not a scholar. He also worked for the biggest companies. So for example, the chief officer for the policy in Uber. So he went from different places to try to implement behavioral economics nudges. And then in order to educate scholars on why their things don't work in the field, like with climate change, he wrote this book, mind-blowing from his own experience about when you go from the lab into the field, a lot of things don't work. He calls this the voltage effect. You see, oh, I was able to increase compliance 50% when I ran the randomized control trial in, I don't know, this context in a lab in Hong Kong. But then when you come to the field, actually things don't work. There's a big voltage effect where things just like fall apart. So he breaks it page by page, why it's so difficult to go to the field. So nowadays, when we try to design policy for the field, if you graduate, you decide to make some change in society, in your organization, then you might want to read this. It's not enough to have solid, credible evidence from academia on one side, but you also need to understand the field and the difficulties of moving this on a mass scale. So that's why the stuff that Katie Milkman does, or the stuff from the vaccinations and the flu shot, this is just outstanding because they're able to do small things, 20%, 10%, but it's small things that show that this is possible. So John here shares a lot of his experience on the stuff that works. So he talks about all kinds of different things, and he also talks about the default effects and about forming habits and all that. But finally, at the end, I think the conclusion is that when it comes to climate change, the effects are very, very weak. So that's a lot for a session, but I did want us to gain some understanding of the complexities, not running a single question vignette with Kahneman and Tversky, but also understanding that when it comes down to making a change in the world, making a change in us, there are some real difficulties, real challenges there. We're difficult, and then society with a lot of people like us is difficult. So we do want to start from behavioral economics and judgment decision-making experiments in the lab here in the classroom, but then it's a whole different challenge to team up with people like Katie Milkman or John List in order to understand how to implement this in the field. And I do hope that some of you would consider this at least as a career in an organization, a nonprofit, or whatever it is that you do after you graduate in order to understand some of these challenges. But now we have a clue, a direction of which people to follow, which people to listen to, what kind of information to look up. So hopefully it will give you some kind of an idea. And next week, you're invited. We're going to sit together in a circle and talk about your future careers. I'll tell you a little bit about my journey. I'll share a little bit from 80,000 hours. But it's really up to you if you want to join or not. It's for your benefit, and I hope you'll find it meaningful. If you don't come next week, completely okay, I understand. I just want to say thank you very much for coming to my course. I had a great time. We played some games. We did all kinds of things. We contemplated our regrets, and we did all kinds of exercises. And I learned a lot from your projects, reading all those and listening to you in the classroom and sitting down together with you. So it was a meaningful journey for me. This is my last year in HKU, but I will be here in the next semester. If you see me around campus or you want to come visit and say hi, I would love to hear from you. I hope to see you more in campus, and I wish you good luck in whatever is next for you. So thank you, and I hope to see you again.